Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. This is the Practicing Alignment in an AI World discussion and workshop. My name is Desiree Aspiras. I'll share a little bit more about who I am and what brings me to this conversation in a moment. Before we begin, I think it's important to name again that this isn't a typical AI workshop or conversation. What I'm more interested in, at least for today, is how we relate to and might use these tools in a different kind of way and how we can stay more aligned while we're using them. And here's another person joining us. Cheryl, hello and welcome. We were just getting started. Again, this isn't a productivity workshop. We are talking about different ways to relate to AI, how we might stay more aligned. And so just briefly, before we jump into the content, who am I? My background is as a therapist, educator, mindfulness instructor, artist. I'm a letterpress printer and do some printmaking and book arts. I engage in quite a bit of art activism. Prior to my work in mental health and my current worlds, I used to be in the entertainment industry and also worked for quite a bit in the nonprofit performing arts center sector. And across all of those spaces, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about mentorship, right? What it means to guide and support others, what it means to pay attention to possible harm that can occur when we're not paying attention to our power, our choices, our responsibilities in our multiple relationships when we aren't holding them with care, right? The way we show up in mentorship, teaching, in our professional roles. It's not neutral, right? How we show up matters. And I didn't expect that these are the kind of same questions and principles that would come back and be foregrounded in such a strong way when I began to work with AI. And so, as part of my background and what brings me to this moment, last spring, I joined the Acosta Institute Fellowship Program. So, the Acosta Institute, if you're not familiar with them, they're an organization that helps to cultivate healing centered leadership and learning at the intersection of education, business, and technology. As a fellow, I was able to participate in the Institute's classes, master classes in both how to use AI and how we might apply these tools in healing centered ways in our work in education. So that was kind of my entry point into working with AI tools. I hadn't really been engaged in using ChatGPT or Claude or some of the main models that currently exist. That was my first foray into working with these tools. It's also important for me to note that when I started learning more about AI last spring, it was also a time when I was feeling um, quite creatively and professionally stuck and a bit isolated. And so I was craving some mentorship, some thoughtful pushback and dialogue. Like I think a lot of us that feel that way when we get to a certain point in our career or our various realms of practice or expertise. I didn't necessarily have easy access to what I was looking for in terms of community or mentorship and guidance, at least in real time. So in one of the AI courses that I was taking along with a number of other people, uh, we were in when we were invited to build a custom AI tool, I decided, why don't I build what I'm yearning for and looking for right now and see what I learn from it. So this is kind of the backdrop of where I was feeling creatively and professionally isolated. Um, and I want to highlight this second point, these structural barriers, for a moment. Even though sometimes we know that there are opportunities to engage in community or mentorship and some guidance in our multiple spheres of influence, let's be real. Sometimes we have to pay to access those spaces. We need to have the luxury of kind of broad swaths of time often to engage in those spaces, or we need to be near them or travel to them. And so I was really feeling, as part of the stuckness, this frustration of my inability to move through and get what I needed because of some of these structural barriers that were in place. So that's something I just wanted to highlight as part of the backdrop of where I was at when I was creating this AI tool in this course. Um, the tool I ended up building, the custom GPT, was I tried to put into form and in the training of this tool what it was that I was looking for. And so this wasn't a productivity tool, but a healing centered thought partner, design mentor, and strategist for brave creative work. So I tried to build and train this as a tool that would prioritize helping me or anyone else using it to find clarity, connect with their integrity, um, have a community and social justice lens, and also encourage movement toward brave creative action. I was like, let me put it all in there, what I'm looking for. And I spent um, really the entirety of the past year working with this tool and experimenting with other tools um, in a number of different ways. And over the past year, what's become interesting to me was how I was engaging with it and how these tools could, in contrast to being more productive or like extractive, could really support and encourage me to do meaningful, values aligned work in the world. And so what I one of the things I noticed was that the same principles that mattered to me in terms of ethical mentorship, intention, attunement, awareness of impact, relationship, that those things also mattered in both how I was using and relating to these tools. And so today what I want to offer is some examples in the ways I've engaged with this tool and other tools over the past year, and some couple of practices that I hope might be useful for us to consider as we engage in using these tools. There's three different examples, I guess, of how I used these tools last year in what I felt was a way in ways that were aligned with what I wanted to do and what matters most to me. So I thought I'd share some of those use cases in case they might be useful for you as well. First of all, in the first example, I found that using these tools could be very helpful for form finding and creative clarity. For example, since one of the things I engage in quite a bit is creative practice and creating letterpress prints, creating artist books, creating posters for artistic activism. One of the first ways I experimented in using this tool I built last year was to help me ideate and find some form around an artist book that I wanted to create for an exhibition that I'd been invited to participate in. Some of the prompts, because of the way I'd trained the AI tool, some of the prompts that Alira, that's the AI tool's name, Alira helped surface were really helpful in assisting me in discerning, like a mentor would, what's the right shape and form for these ideas? And also, how might we explore what beyond what's expected or familiar? So Alira was able to prompt me with really interesting questions like, what would this idea look like if it broke the usual rules or my usual rules or went outside of my typical preferences? What's a material or form of way of going about this that might feel risky or exciting or just kind of weirdly right? How might the tone or the message of this work change depending on the form it takes? And then this last prompt, which struck me as really powerful in a number of different ways. What's the smallest, most honest version of this idea I could begin with? And this prompt was so profound for me in helping me find clarity, make decisions, because again, this was in the context of I wanted to create something for an exhibition, which I knew other quite impressive people had been invited to participate in as well, with more research, more resources than I had access to, more time, more skill. And so because of that, I was feeling this pressure, I think, as we all do to do more, make something bigger. How can I make this flashier? How can I um, compete? And this question, what's the smallest, most honest version of this idea I could begin with, was very grounding and really brought me back to like the main idea, which if I play this video here, just this quick visual of this artist book that I ended up creating, which was about what matters most, what emerges when we engage in refusal, when we make space, when we make time, because of these prompts that help push me towards just clarity. I was still able to create something that, even though I didn't have all the resources and time and expensive access to different materials and tools, I could still get my message across in this project in a really honest way. These types of prompts really helped encourage me and push me towards that. So that form finding and that clarity piece in these prompts from this tool was really useful. Another way that I used this tool last year was both in professional endeavors and also in some change work and activist campaigns that I was involved in last year. Helped me quite a bit with scenario mapping for strategic action. So I could, when I was working with the tool, I would put in, here's the context, here's what we're dealing with, here's what we're trying to accomplish, but here are some of the places where we feel uneasy in terms of how to present things to the community or to certain stakeholders. What are the pitfalls? What should we consider? What's going to be most effective? And so this was also another way that I was able to use these tools to support meaningful work in my life, and as a way to not just to be strategic, but to remain aligned with my and my colleagues and communities' values and how to keep those foregrounded and centered. And what I also really appreciated about the scenario mapping with this Alira tool, which is, again, I had tried to train into it the priorities of being community centered, social justice forward, and also healing centered. It would also, in its some of its prompts, kind of check in and remind me or my colleagues who were using this tool. It would offer examples or ways that we might engage in a number of actions in maybe a more sustainable or slower way, instead of bombarding us or encouraging us to do more than we had capacity for. So that was something that was also really useful and helped us to, again, stay aligned, but engage in actions and work in a more sustainable, um, paced. Uh, and then just the third final use case example that I thought was really powerful was this aspect of nervous system preparation and rehearsing integrity. And I'll share what that looked like and meant for me. This tool was really powerful in helping to prepare for difficult conversations, courageous and challenging conversations. So, for example, I might use this tool to prepare for a tough media interview, where I was really afraid that I might get some gotcha questions and not be able to respond properly. Other ways we might use this is preparing for challenging conversations with colleagues, with students, um, where we could work with an AI tool as a thought partner, not just to map out likely questions and rehearse kind of standard answers to things. But I would ask questions like, here's what I'm most afraid they're going to ask or bring up. What are some other questions that might make me want to deflect or get defensive or shut down? And I really leaned into this practice of using these tools as a thought partner, not to help craft the perfect answer, but to explore what it would feel like and the options that I could take in terms of how I might respond in order to stay open and truthful and in integrity with what was most important to me in those conversations so that I could do that even when I was scared, right? So this wasn't about feeling safer necessarily heading into these difficult conversations, but it was about feeling more capable. In a sense, I was able to, and my nervous system was able to rehearse kind of the most difficult scenarios so that then I could move from, I don't know if I can handle this, maybe I just won't and avoid. Um, and it moved me towards, okay, I've already been here. I've prepared. I've had some exposure to the worst case scenarios, and I know what it feels like to respond to those situations now. And I feel like I have some practice and I'm able to do that, even if it might feel hard. So those are just like three examples of ways that I use these tools over the past year to support meaningful work and to stay kind of aligned to what was most important. And I think it's important to say that as a through line across all these different ways we might use it, the focus doesn't have to be, oh, I'm outsourcing my thinking. That might be one way that people use this, but that we can use this to create spaces where we can think more deeply, we can prepare appropriately to remain aligned in situations we're stepping into, and that it can help us consider the paths that we might be able to take. So I'll just pause there for a second if there's any comments or questions before I share a couple of practices that might be useful as well.
Hi, Desiree.
Hi.
Hi, Cheryl. I'm really interested in the last part that you presented on the nervous system preparation. I'm currently a graduate student and
Mhm.
I have so much nervous energy around speaking up in class.
Uh-huh.
And I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people when I am comfortable with the information, right? And
Mhm.
knowledge that I have. But as a student, I'm learning new things every week. And when I'm pressed to present that information and appear like I already know it, even though we're students learning it,
Mhm.
during that class, it just makes me so nervous. So I am really pulled towards that example as a use because in school, for me, it really this past year has been the first time that I've included AI in my life.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it is very much just using it as a tool, mostly for research, sometimes for
Mhm.
creativity. But I just wanted to share that I'm drawn to that as a resource for
Mhm.
supporting those conversations. Yeah.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. There's so many ways that these tools can be supportive and kind of encourage us to show up and stand up, and speak and be in many of these spaces that we often don't feel very comfortable in. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheryl, did I see a hand?
I was just going to say, just like Karen, I have the problem of like getting nervous when either speaking in public speaking or also even speaking to people a little bit more um, higher level in work
Okay.
with me, just because I don't know if it's like imposter syndrome or so
Hmm.
that I find that the tool is just helpful in trying to work through that.
Mhm.
And I'm in school too, but I'm also like looking for work, and then also the whole process of looking for work is kind of challenging.
Mhm.
So I find that I need to break through my shell a little bit
Mhm.
more. I guess I'm like an introvert, so it's
Mhm.
like my shell is also thinking I want to work remote, but there's opportunities that
Mm.
are more than remote, and I gotta like get out of my shell.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And in my job as a therapist, so many people that I work with, actually the majority of people I work with are women. And parts of what you both shared are often very present in my conversations with people. And so I really appreciate the power of using these tools to help us prepare, map things out, and support us in the ways that we need in order to be able to show up and stand up and take space and offer what we have to offer. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful and meaningful way we can use these tools. Before I shift into a couple of practices that might be useful, one thing I'd like to underline is that prompts aren't neutral, right? What we input into these AI tools and also what we get back is not necessarily neutral. We know that bias exists in all the spaces and systems that we move in. And these tools are trained on what's on the internet and what already exists, right? So just reminding us that bias is built into these systems, not that we can't get around that or account for that, but just to remember that bias is in these systems. So that's something to think about when we're engaging in these tools. And also our use of these tools is not neutral, right? Even though we're far removed from the process of how these are developed, it's important for us, I think, as we're engaging with these tools to think about not just the bias that's inherent in them, but also the amount of resources, natural and human resources that are extracted and exploited in order to create these tools is immense. And that's part of a larger discussion, but to be thoughtful of that as we're sitting down to use these tools to support us, that they're resource heavy. So what are we doing with it? And does it matter? Is it important what we're using it for? At least that's the lens that I use as I'm working with these tools. And so a few things here um, that have come to the forefront for me and that I'd like to share um, to help us stay more aligned while we are using these tools. So this first part, for looking at the macro level of kind of the overall session when we're sitting and starting to work with this tool for a period of time, is intention and attunement. So again, this is kind of the macro level practice, right? How are we entering and staying oriented throughout our work? And so we want to start with intention. So before I would open up a Lyra or an AI tool, I slow down and ask, what am I here for? What purpose am I serving? What matters most right now? Right? These are classic contemplative prompts that help really ground us in our values before we step in and engage. And then also, and I'll talk about this more, attuning to our body and mind, both of them, right? So before we step in, kind of tracking where we're at. What are we thinking? What are we feeling in our body? Am I staying aligned with my intention? Does this feel okay? Does this feel right? Or am I feeling kind of discomfort or tension in my body? Our body tells us when we've drifted away from feeling aligned. The big takeaway here is setting our intention and kind of aligning ourselves before we step into our working with these tools. And then this second part here is kind of micro level. This is more of the kind of how we stay engaged while we're actually working with the tool. So this is even at the prompt level, how we might show up in each individual interaction. So this contemplative pause before we prompt. what's the quality even of our presence and attention? Are we feeling frazzled? Are we in a hurry? Do we just want quick answers? Are we kind of in an extractive mode? Right? That's going to show up in what we ask and then also how the AI tool responds, right? So that's important to consider. So slowing down, pausing throughout helps us to be more present and to check in. So in terms of this pause, I invite people to actually do this both before and after prompts we put in, and we get the response from the AI tool in order to check in with ourselves after we've read the response. Does this response feel aligned with what I was looking for? And here's where it's important to check the body. Is there discomfort? Is there any tension? And the reason I say that's important is because these are somatic signals. This is important information that the body gives us, which we often discount, right? Because we're so like mind and thought focused in this culture, right? But the body can give us really important signals. And what some research in engaging in values aligned action and in being in integrity tells us is that the body gives us signals first or faster and lets us know almost immediately when something's off or when we're out of integrity or something doesn't feel right. So when we read a response that a tool has then given back to us, does it feel good? Does it feel aligned? Is it speaking to what we were looking for? If it's not, pay attention to that, because that tension or that murky discomfort that we feel in our body means that something's not right about the response. And we know that these somatic responses actually occur faster than our conscious mind can think through, wait, why am I having this reaction? Right? So if we have that reaction, another, I guess, useful tip is to tell the AI tool, I'm not liking this response. I'm not sure why yet, but there's something about this paragraph or I don't like it. It doesn't feel aligned. Put that back into the AI tool so that I can work with you and respond to help craft something or provide something that's more useful or more aligned with what we're looking for. So that's important to mention. And also this relational reminder. So even though AI isn't sentient yet, how we treat these interactions impacts us. Right? I know when I use these tools, I want to remain human, thoughtful, and engaged. I don't want to just be consuming outputs and using it to be more productive or extractive. So what's the language I'm using when I'm interacting with the tool? How am I relating to it? Because for me, this is one of the important things that's emerged is this focus on just staying ethically consistent, meaning that I want to interact with these tools in the ways that I would with anyone else that I'm working with. So I'll pause there. Any questions or responses so far with what I've just shared here before we have some reflection prompts?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I think ritual is really important. So if these are becoming part of your daily life, making sure that this practicing with intention becomes part of that practice as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can see that being really important. I also I as I started using them, I'm really curious. I'm gonna practice communicating with the AI like I would a peer at work or a friend because I've just found it kind of funny, like how polite that they are. The formality, I'm not necessarily like that, right? With work or friends. It just feels too formal. But I'm
Uh-huh.
wondering, I mean, what's been your experience like practicing that? I'm assuming you are a friendly, caring person in real life. So if
I hope so.
if you're
I
like
think so.
that,
That's what I
you
hear.
know, if you're like that with the AI, does it I guess I'd be afraid that I'm like not maintaining that boundary. Would it cross
Mm.
over into this friendship? And at this point,
Ah.
I don't
Mhm.
want it to be a friendship with this,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
non-sentient being. So,
Yeah, no, that's
yeah,
a really important consideration, right? Especially as we're hearing some of these on the more extreme end,
yeah,
these
yeah,
examples of, or maybe extreme, but becoming more common
Mm.
right, of how people are using these tools as kind of relationship stand-ins.
Right.
So I think the maintaining the boundary is something that's important for people to consider when, I guess, what do I need to clarify from what I was sharing in terms of the relational reminder? Part of why I include that in here is that, we can sometimes see how we might speak to or prompt a tool in a way that we might never speak to someone else in terms of being commanding, demanding, do
Mhm.
this, do that. I don't like this. With and part of my concern and why I remind us about this is we are part of who we are is what we do and how we behave and what we
Mhm.
cultivate. So if we're being either more cruel or not as in thoughtful or careful even in how we talk to these tools that has an impact on us as well, and so that's part of why I put in this
Yeah.
relational reminder. We are in relationship with 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 this tool, but you're absolutely right, there are people that aren't paying attention or maybe aren't as concerned about that boundary um, in the way they engage these tools, and that's certainly a really important conversation and discussion and consideration.
Mhm. Yeah, I also it's feels sometimes hypocritical because I do advocate for the tools to reduce isolation and loneliness, especially like I
Mhm.
work with older populations, and I see the
Yes.
benefit or where research is coming out around the benefit of
Mhm.
folks in isolation to have those AI type of relationships,
Right.
you know?
Right. And
Yeah.
so related to that, even the kinds of like physical, like robot creations that people are creating for companionship.
Mhm.
For like older people, isolated people, like these robot dogs that are like so cute,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all these things. And so what I try to encourage people to do is, yes, this can be a tool, right, to reduce a sense of isolation, but also, how can this be a bridge to continuing to connect with other real life human people? And are those invitations and encouragements being trained into the different tools that are supposed to support people in isolation or provide some companionship?
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Because they are what we train into them, right? And that's also why thoughtful people with these kinds of questions, even though there's a lot to critique and a lot that's problematic about these tools, that's why people who have these kinds of concerns, and are thinking about them should be just as engaged and inputting and training and being just involved in these conversations so that we can help to move the needle, hopefully, on some
Yeah,
things. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
absolutely. Thank you.
And let's see. So these are just a couple of reflection questions I wanted to end with for you to either just reflect on or even share out into just this space. I know we don't have too much time left, and I want to be respectful of your time. Um, So these are a couple of questions just to share. Where in your work are you maybe avoiding really difficult questions or work because you don't have someone to explore it with, right? And this is where some of these tools might be supportive. And also, in what ways could using these tools in the ways that we've discussed support how you navigate complexity and change work in some of the systems that you move in. I know we've touched a little bit on these things in some of your shares, but taking a moment to think about this and if there's anything you'd like to share out in this space.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to take up too much time, but I, I'm a student. I'll also
Mhm.
be, job searching. So I'm sure I can relate to what Cheryl was saying earlier too. But just, yeah, that using it to prepare my nervous system for some of those possibly challenging situations, like getting ahead of that imposter syndrome that may come up. That's where in terms of kind of the work that I avoid because I just don't want to have those feelings in my body, right? So
Mhm.
I'm just
Mhm.
like, I don't know. I don't know what someone's gonna say, or I don't know how someone's gonna make me feel. Like I do, because I've been in those situations before, but
Mhm.
I'm definitely avoiding it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love that these are tools that can help us turn toward the thing, um, and work through some of those discomforts and worries in a, um, relatively confidential way and private way before we, take that into the world. Any other thoughts or comments on this before we wrap up?
Yes. I was going to mention so I'm a student too, and I'm looking for work, but I just came from a job. One thing that it's hard for me to want to reach out to because I feel a little bit of embarrassment. Kind of getting the confidence to interview. It's been a while since I interviewed, and now these days they have bots interviewing
I
you, and they have
know.
real people in panels interview, and
Mhm,
intimidating. And I don't have that resource of like a mentor, or I'm embarrassed to ask my friends because they're my
mhm,
friends. They're a totally different. Yeah, I want to put boundaries in friendships instead of like
mhm.
doing that kind of thing. Um, you know, having the space to kind of be vulnerable.
But yeah, to work it out, to discuss it, to just explore in a way that can help your nervous system slowly step into it at the pace that works for you. So yeah, these are what you've both mentioned are useful ways we might engage with some of these tools. So thank you for sharing those offerings and also for joining in this space and conversation. Here is my information if you want to stay connected. I'm thinking about just as we're wrapping up, I'm thinking about inviting a small group of interested folks into a 3-week practice circle where it's just 3 weeks and I share some prompts, some ways to engage in a comfortable, low pressure setting where we can play with some of these ideas that I've talked about. So I'll share about that in my follow-up email if that's something that you or any of your colleagues might be interested in. But just thank you again for sharing this hour here. I hope there have been some useful takeaways for you, and there's offerings to come that also might be interesting and useful. So look out for those in the follow up email. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing your practice with us.
Yes, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.